Her new take on public speaking combines her lifelong experiences of her broadcast career, along with her experiences conducting popular pitching, presenting, speaking workshops for universities, corporations, global law firms, financial institutions, and media companies. Adora holds equity in startup companies and is an angel investor, a lawyer, and a writer on communicating in a digital age. She served as interim president of News Deeply, a digital native media startup that created SyriaDeeply.com, which Time magazine called the future of news, as well as EbolaDeeply.com. Adora is a graduate of the University of Michigan and the UCLA School of Law. She's an award-winning global storyteller and broadcast journalist who spent a dozen years at CNN, ABC News, and public radio. She's covered stories such as the Iraq War and Hurricane Katrina. Adora has been published on Medium.com, MSNBC.com, Essence.com, CNN.com, among others. She has traveled the world, having lived on or spent extensive amounts of time on 4 continents: North America, Africa, Europe, and Central Asia, the Middle East. Adora, whose Nigerian name means daughter of all, is a proud citizen of both the United States and Ireland. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Adora Udoji. Thank you.
Thank you. It makes me sound so interesting. It's such an honor to be here. It's surreal, it's wacky, I sort of have goosebumps all over my body. It was 20 years ago, well, a little more than that if I'm honest about it, that I left UCLA Law. And since then, I've done a few things, and I've had a lot of seats at a bunch of different tables, from starting in the law to television, producing, to being on air, to being a radio host, to corporate strategy, angel investing, and now as an entrepreneur. And what I've loved about this day so far, my favorite part is the long line at the ladies' room. I gotta tell you, it's been a very long time since I've been at a tech anything where there was a very long line at the ladies' room. So that's progress. The second thing that I was really struck by this morning, I mean, there was a lot of really robust and interesting conversation, was a young woman who talked about how she's never experienced any gender discrimination. And of course, the little voice in my head was like, well, just wait. But then I had to say, wait a second, maybe she will or maybe she won't. But the mere fact that she could articulate that to me feels like a sign of progress. I usually don't write out my speeches, but I did today because I wanted to stay a little bit more focused. I've kissed the Blarney Stone a few times, and for those of you who don't know, that gives you the gift of gab, and I have a tendency to go on tangents. I want to start with a question, which is, how many of you like public speaking? How many of you think you're really good at it, you're great at it? I can count the hands. Was that 5? Was that 5 hands? If this was a room full of men, for which I've been in many, all the hands would have went up. And I'm not joking. And I come to this, a couple of years ago, I got involved in something called the Pipeline Fund Fellowship. It's an angel investing boot camp for women. And the idea is to demystify the process of investing and encourage a greater network in the United States to back women-led ventures. And so I started going to a lot of pitches and watching both men and women pitch. And at the end of the day, public speaking is really painful. I mean, it's even painful for me. I get dry mouth. As much as I've done it, and as much as I teach it, I always have my bottle of water. But the point is, I watched how people struggled so much. Generally speaking, of course, it's hard to put words to something that's new, to try to make it understandable and relatable to whoever it is that you're talking to. But I really noticed a pattern about how hard some of the women struggled with the pitching, and many of them, and meeting them and talking to them about what their struggles were. And at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur or a corporate innovator or anyone who's trying to start something new, your story is everything. You have to be able to explain what your vision is, what your thought is, in order to get anyone to sign on. Because nobody's doing anything by themselves. And I started getting asked a lot to work with entrepreneurs to do some workshops. And from that, in the last 6 or 8 months, I've done it with several hundred people, including Girls Who Code, with young women who are learning to code. What came out of that was Out Loud Inc. And we're in our really early stages, but what I wanted to do was try to take a look and make the case for what I've witnessed the last 20 years as a journalist and traveling all over the world, which is there are all kinds of effective speakers, from CEOs to refugees in Afghan refugee camps. I've seen it. I've seen that people can effectively communicate in ways that are sometimes unexpected or not like what we consider the charismatic leader, those people who have particular type of skills, who are witty and funny and humorous and can stand up and really make the crowd feel something. At the end of the day, effective communication is bigger than that. And our quest at Out Loud Inc. is, one, to find a very simple way to help people share what they know. The most powerful way that people share what they know is through stories. Long before there were computers or there were even books and written words, people sat around the fire, they talked to one another, they learned things, they collaborated, and change happened. And so I ask you, when it comes to the story about women in tech, what are you telling yourself? What is the organization that you're involved in telling? What are we saying? What words are we using? Because words really do matter. And I'm not quite sure that we spend enough time in general, and I say this very broadly, but in the marketplace, we spend time and resources trying to articulate who we are and what we're doing. And that is part of what feels to me like a life's mission. I sort of think I was between the Nigerian side and the Irish side. Genetically, it was just impossible that I wasn't going to be fascinated with stories. I'm not lyrical, I'm not terribly funny, but what I am is a forensic storyteller. I spent all those years watching people communicate and dissecting what they're saying and then what they're doing as a result of that. And at the end of the day, the story of women in technology, and I will include women in innovation because ultimately technology is driving innovation in all sorts of ways across sectors and across functions. What's the story? It goes something like this. There are no women. There are no women engineers. Girls aren't interested in technology. And I sometimes think part of the story that's missing is technology companies don't grow up by themselves. Of course it takes technologists and engineers, and that's one part of it. But then there's also a whole host of non-tech skills that are needed in order for anything to be successful, whether it be a startup. Google had to start somewhere. And at this point, it wasn't just the technologists who are making it as successful. It is a critical component, but there are other roles that are just as important. I'm not sure that that's part of the story. And yes, the numbers are very small, comparatively speaking, and we have a road to go when it comes to parity. But there are some of us who are working in technology. I love what my dear friend Kelly Hoey, who's an investor, says. She says, I don't do tech, but I'm in tech. And that's how I would describe myself, and I certainly know other women and other people of color who have skills to contribute to this new world that all of us are building. I like what somebody said this morning about change, about how the tech universe prides itself on rapid change. So why can't we fix this problem right away? There is a growing sense of urgency from where I sit because there's far more conversation about these issues, and it has to start somewhere. So you start with the conversation. You try to understand what the underpinnings are. What are the obstacles here for women? But even as we look at those obstacles, again, it's important to note that part of the story is, yes, the numbers are very unequal. There are women in this space. There are women working in this space, there are many people who are at the table talking about and taking action in a variety of different ways, whether it's research for academics or corporates who are experimenting with different pipeline initiatives to encourage more women and a sense of openness that hasn't necessarily existed in this space. I didn't come from bastions of diversity, from the law to broadcast journalism. But I have to say that in this technology ecosystem, I don't think I've ever felt more invisible. And I remember I had a moment, it was an out-of-body moment. I was standing with some phenomenally successful investors and entrepreneurs, mega entrepreneurs. And they literally didn't see me standing there. So much so that one of the men leaned over me to shake the hand of another man who walked up. And oddly enough, and this is not a perfect analogy, but it did remind me a little bit of going to the Taliban embassy in Pakistan. In that, I literally am not standing there. It's not a perfect analogy because I'm certainly not trying to make light of the vicious and brutal tactics and antics of the Taliban against women. But what I'm saying is it was a familiar feeling that I had at that moment. We exist is part of the story. People are working to address these challenges. And there's tremendous body of research at this point about the significant value add of women. And some of the numbers that I saw recently that I really like in Forbes that were published in Forbes, part of them were Kauffman Institute numbers, but there were some others, that the organizations that are the most inclusive of women in top management achieve a 35% higher return on equity. That's significant, 35%. 34% better total return to shareholders versus their peers. And this is a quote, "Research shows gender diversity to be particularly valuable where innovation is key." I'd like to see that story as part of the mainstream narrative of women in tech. I think to speed this evolution of discussion and greater inclusiveness, we got to change the narrative. And it's time to bust a few myths. For some particular reason, well, for many reasons, we cling in American culture particularly to this notion of the Lone Ranger, that somehow one person does everything by themselves. And I was drawn to this magazine as I was getting on the plane to come out here to California. It's Life magazine, 100 Women Who Changed the World. And there are some phenomenal stories in here, from Cleopatra to Marie Curie to Oprah, of women who made substantial and incredible impact, who have and did impact their communities in astronomical ways. But even when we're celebrating women, it's interesting when you read the profiles because there's so little discussion about how and who helped them make those changes. In other words, each of us, when we look at the obstacles of women in tech, each of us can play a role in how this evolves in big and little ways. All of us are not necessarily going to be out front, but in our daily lives, in the spheres of influence that we have, each of us has a role to play, not unlike all of the many, many people who helped all of these women to achieve the things that they did. And as I've worked across sectors and different roles, I've sort of decided that at the end of the day, nobody really knows much. All of us are making it up as we go along, meaning we have experience and we have knowledge, but there's no one person who has all the answers to any of these big questions that we're addressing today. And there's great irony that I would even be talking about women in tech. I was sort of the third grader who decided that fractions didn't like me much. And I remember seeing DOS for the first time, and it just, I think I decided that there was no place for me in that world. And now working with engineers and developers all of the time, there's such a sense of there's such a sense of, I'm not even sure I know what the word is. It's just that things are possible in ways that none of us can imagine once we engage in the things that we love most. And for me, that has been this thread of storytelling, which I believe is the most powerful way to transfer knowledge, to influence and persuade and motivate others to act. And that's by personifying our facts and figures. And tech and innovation is about insights derived from someone who simply doesn't see the world like everyone else. And in this space, we need the best insights that lead to creation, and that can't be fully realized if we are systematically excluding entire genders, races, or ethnicities. I mean, we need the best ideas, and I think I've heard that several times this morning, and that we would all agree. And there's two ways I think the story happens. I think one is we get clear about what the facts are in our individual spheres, and it's person to person. And then there's also the institutional tales that just simply amplify whatever those messages are. My favorite phone call this week came from a very, very successful entrepreneur. He and his co-founder, they've raised millions of dollars in the company, and their products have a lot of traction. And they're making a key hire. And so he was asking me about, out of the 5 candidates they have for a very senior role, one of them is a woman, whom I know. And so he was asking me what I thought about her, and he said, you know, I really liked her, but one of the things that I didn't get from her, and I'm not quite sure that we need it, but we might, is this sense of get up and go and get things done. And I was like, I had a moment of extreme gratitude that he felt comfortable calling me, that he could put words to what he felt, because sometimes, as we spoke about this morning, unconscious bias, you got to sort of put words to what that is. It was a classic take of, he's looking for the charismatic leader, the brash, bold, witty, clever guy, which is the profile of the 4 others that he was interviewing. This woman is very quiet-spoken, and it's incredibly deceptive. She's been astronomically successful in that industry, and she has accolades like you would not believe. Him bringing that to me was a gift, because I was then able to say to him, okay, well, let's think about this for a second. You're right. Her personality is not all of those other things. But this is what she has accomplished, and there's no way on anybody's planet would she have been able to accomplish those things if she wasn't ambitious, if she wasn't incredibly smart, and most important to him is that she's effective. I mean, how about that? So the idea of what the charismatic leader or speaker looks like, this is something I'm really looking forward to putting into its grave. Because women generally, our profiles are very different from men and the way that men generally go about things. And when you take a look at public speaking, for example, I have a team of researchers, and we've been looking at some extraordinary research, anything from Aristotle straight through to neuroeconomists. But one of the things that I saw back up what I've really witnessed and experienced as I was watching these women pitching, women and men generally, and again, I'm speaking very generally, think about public speaking very differently. Women tend to think about it defensively. We don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to look bad. We're trying to win over everyone in the room. Men, generally speaking, see it as a dynamic situation, that at any moment they can convert anybody in the room, but if they convert at least one person, that's a win. If you're looking at speaking defensively, you've already baked that into whatever it is, the substance that you're now about to speak about. And that affects the impact of whatever it is that you're talking about. And I think that as I had this conversation with him, at the end of the day, he might go with one of the 4 candidates who more typically fit that template. But I gave him an opportunity to consider a different perspective. And I'm hopeful that he'll make the right decision. But obviously, I don't have control over that. But I think that part of change comes with those conversations. And so again, I ask you, what's the story that you're telling yourself, and what's the story that your organization, be it an academic, corporate, entrepreneurial, or investing institution, what are you saying? What are the words that you're using when you're talking about women in tech? I'm encouraged terrifically by some of the work that I've been doing, particularly with organizations like Girls Who Code or Black Girls Who Code, who are building this notion of communicating and public speaking and storytelling right into their programs. Because I think it's important to think about these things as you move forward, because ultimately, no matter what your work is in any of the disciplines that I've listed, how you talk about it is sometimes even more important, in the sense that if you're not fully articulating clearly to others, then they can't understand, and so therefore it doesn't grow like the ripple effect of the stone in the water. And yeah, I'm impatient. You know, I'm really impatient. I've never been known for my patience. And I want everything fixed yesterday. And I feel a terrific sense of urgency, even more so because I have a 6-year-old daughter. And I desperately need for her to believe that if she wants it, there is a place for her in this tech ecosystem. And so I implore all of you to think about the question that I've been asking, to think about wherever you are, is enough time and energy and resources being spent on what are we saying? What's really true? How are we saying it? What is our story? What is other people's stories? And I think for each of us, we have a sphere of influence. And when I said before that you can engage in small and big ways, this is what I mean. When you're in the room, and they're looking for an expert, which, by the way, is another thing that women really struggle with, claiming this notion of being an expert. It was sort of the bane of my existence when I was a journalist, always trying to find diverse voices, but trying to convince somebody that they're an expert, it can be really painful. But if you're in the room and they're talking about whoever it is that you're working with, and they're looking for a certain type of expertise or knowledge, you know, do you pipe up with someone that you know who just happens to be a woman to say the name? Because being visible has got to be part of that story. There's the facts and there's the anecdotes. I mean, there's qualitative and quantitative information, but a picture does speak louder than words. We know this. Pictures are really powerful. And so when there are high visible events or assignments, and you're in a position to help influence who gets them, are you piping up with names of people that you know who just happen to be women? Or if you're at an institution and you're making choices about various initiatives, are you piping up about what the value add might be for your organization relative to these issues of women in tech? It all counts. It all counts. And I really do think it does start with the story about who you are, what it is that you're doing. And as we continue to have events like this, because that would be a big thing, right? To have so many people in a room who don't necessarily know each other, all talking about this issue from different perspectives. And I love the fact that it's cross-generational here too, because we have so much to learn from one another. As I did this morning from that young woman who has never experienced gender discrimination. I think that's awesome. I certainly wish that for my daughter. And I'm going to mix metaphors here. I feel like I have to because we're in Los Angeles. I actually live outside of New York City, but I got to reference at least one movie, right? Or not, right? But I love the sentiments of these two. In the infamous words of Dr. Spock, I hope that all of you live long and prosper and continue to look for ways to plug into this matrix, whether they be big or small, as we try to move the ball toward greater gender equity. I thank you all very much for listening. It's a great honor to be here, and I look forward to speaking to and getting to know more of you as this afternoon progresses. Thanks.